We've seen that we can use the subquery functionality to define a new table on the fly just by writing some code. A new table that we can then query just like any other SQL table. And what this allows us to do is to run jobs that are too complex for a single query. And to do that without defining new tables in our database and storing new tables in our database. It is essentially a tool to manage complexity, and this is how it works for subqueries. So instead of saying from and then the name of a table, we open round brackets and then we write a independent SQL query in there. And we know that every SQL query returns a table, and this is the table that we can then work on. What we do here is to select star from this table and then apply a filter on this new column that we created in the subquery power level. And now I will show you another way to achieve the same result, which is through a functionality called common table expressions. To build a common table expression, I will take the logic of this query right here and I will move it up. And next, I will give a name to this table. I will call it power level table. And then all I need to say is with power level table as, followed by the logic. And now this is just another table that is available in my query. And it is defined by the logic of what occurs within the round brackets. And so I can refer to this over here and query it just like I need. And when I run this, you see that we get the same results as before. And this is how a common table expression works. You start with the keyword with, you give an alias to the table that you're going to create, you put as, open round brackets, write an independent query that will of course return a table under this alias over here, and then in your code you can query this alias just like we've done until now for any SQL table. And although our data result hasn't changed, I would argue that this is a better and more elegant way to achieve the same result because we have separated in the code the logic for these two different tables. Instead of putting this logic in between this query and sort of breaking the flow of this table, we now have a much cleaner solution where first we define the virtual table that we will need. And by virtual, I mean that we treat it like a table, but it's not actually saved in our database. It's still defined by our code. And then below that, we have the logic that uses this virtual table. We can also have multiple common table expressions in our query. Let me show you what that looks like. So in our previous example on subquery, we added another part where here, instead of querying the fantasy characters table, we queried a filter on this characters table and it looked like this. We were doing select star where is alive equals true. So I'm just reproducing what I did in the previous lecture on subqueries. Now you will notice that this is really not necessary because all we're doing here is add a where filter and we could do this in this query directly, but please bear with me because I just want to show you how to handle multiple queries. The second thing I want to tell you is, although this code actually works and you can verify for yourself, I do not recommend doing this, meaning mixing common table expressions and subqueries. It is really not advisable because it adds unnecessary complexity to your code. So here we have a common table expression that contains a subquery, and I will rather turn this into a situation where we have two common table expressions and no subqueries at all. And to do that, I will take this logic over here and paste it at the top. And I will give this now an alias. So I will call it characters alive, but you can call it whatever is best for you. And then I will do the keyword as, add some lines in here to make it more readable. And now, once we are defining multiple common table expressions, we only need to do the with keyword once at the beginning, and then we can simply add a comma, and please remember this, the comma is very important. And then we have the alias of the new table, the as keyword, and then the logic for that table. All that's needed to do now is to fill in this from, because we took away the subquery, and we need to query the characters alive virtual table here, and this is what it looks like. And if you run this, you will get your result. So this is what the syntax looks like when you have multiple common table expressions. You start with the keyword with, which you're only going to need once. And then you give the alias of your first table, as keyword, and then the logic between round brackets. And then for every extra virtual table that you want to add, for every extra common table expression, you only need to add a comma, and then another alias, the as keyword, and then the logic between round brackets. And when you are done listing your common table expressions, you will omit the comma. You will not have a comma here because it will break your code. And finally, you will run your main query. And in each of these queries that you can see here, you are totally free to query real tables, material tables that exist in your database, as well as common table expressions that you have defined in this code. And in fact, you can see that our second virtual table here is querying the first one. However, be advised that the order in which you write these common table expressions matters, because a common table expression can only reference common table expressions that came before it. It's not going to be able to see those that came after it. So if I say here, instead of from fantasy characters, I try to query from power level table, you will see that I get an error from BigQuery because it doesn't recognize it basically, because the code is below. So the order in which you write them matters.